Welcome back to John Boyd Book Club. This week we are taking up the second half of Osinga's Chapter 5, Core Arguments. So this week what we're going to focus on is patterns of conflict, sort of Boyd's first major presentation of his ideas and thoughts on strategy and human thinking. As we work through patterns of conflict, I'm going to go back to Boyd's original slide deck for my references. Osinga lays out all of the information that is on Boyd's slides, provides a little bit of commentary on them, and that's all really useful and helpful information. There are also numerous sources of patterns of conflict in its updated state available online, PDFs that you can download, as well as the video footage of Boyd presenting it, which is also very useful. However, for our discussion purposes, I want to come back to looking at patterns of conflict in the format in which Boyd originally presented it and the way that I came about studying it originally, and that is the original spiral-bound slide decks that Boyd used. And this originally dates back to December of 1986. And if you download and go through the original slide deck, you'll notice that there are handwritten corrections throughout it. And that's a testament to how Boyd's thinking was evolving throughout the project. So what is the point of patterns of conflict? What is patterns of conflict about? And ultimately, Boyd expresses to us that the intent of patterns of conflict is to unveil the character of conflict, survival, and conquest. Boyd's work is principally about the military nature of this idea, because that's the world that he comes from. And while we as students of Boyd's and Boydian thinking are going to come from a multitude of backgrounds, it's important that we come back to the idea that central to Boyd's thinking as he's developing these concepts initially is this notion of conquest, that he is coming from a military standpoint. Early on in Patterns of Conflict, Boyd begins addressing this notion of fast transients and the OODA loop. This is the first time that we see this notion of observe, orient, decide, act loops applied in Boyd's thinking, in his phrasing, in his discussion of strategy. And initially, it comes out of this air-to-air combat kind of domain. And he begins showing us, taking us on this journey of showing how his own thinking has evolved over time, how it has emerged from the world of the fighter pilot, the practitioner of air combat maneuvering, and transitioned into a broader way of looking at how one collapses an adversary's system into confusion and disorder by causing him to over and underreact to activity that appears simultaneously menacing as well as ambiguous, chaotic, or misleading. The emphasis is Boyd's in the original slide deck. This is slide 7 in the original slide deck and is also, again, presented directly in the Osinga text. Ultimately, I think that this idea, this transitional idea of moving from a world of the fighter pilot acting in the moment to the broader concept of strategy that is going on here is developing, it is showing us how Boyd wants to apply destruction and creation in what I'm referring to as the mind space, in the both conceptual and temporal place where strategy and decisions emerge from. And as Boyd is addressing conquest, military victory, this is where his notions of collapsing an adversary's system into confusion and disorder come into play. As we talk about Boyd's thinking and how we apply patterns of conflict in general, I think it's important to remember that the environment matters. We need to recognize that Boyd's thinking is going to be applied differently by the soldier on the battlefield or the fighter in the ring than we're going to apply it in a business setting or on the fire ground. And the reason for this is context. Context matters. Ground truth matters. While the ultimate objective in all of these contexts, as Boyd would say, is survival on our own terms, the domains are different. Their requirements are different. On many levels, we can all agree that conquest, to one degree or another, is the dominant paradigm that comes into a physical fight. The degree to which that conquest is about destruction varies, certainly, from the military context to the fighting context in our minds. But I think Boyd would argue that ultimately these are seeking to do the same thing, and that is suppress the enemy's will, the opponent's capacity to perform in such a way where you get them to relinquish the fight. Ultimately, the Boydian method is not the war of destruction and attrition. It is the war of maneuver and compelling the enemy to quit the fight. In the same sense, the business context is a different one. While there is a very common model that business is about obliterating your competition, I don't know that that's an incredibly valuable tool. I don't know that that's an incredibly valuable strategy for long-term success. Microsoft and Apple, I think, are great examples of this. Neither one of them are going to completely obliterate their competitor in the operating system space. What they are going to do is carve out environments where they will succeed and thrive. They become tribal, which we can see in the way their presentations, the way their marketing and their advertisement works, is that oftentimes it's about a tribal affiliation as opposed to some sort of attempt to utterly dominate the other and render them out of business. In the fireground context, in the fire service context, ultimately we are not in a battle with fire as a thinking opponent. We are never going to eliminate the risk of unrestrained fire and dominate it. We are not going to be in a conquest over it. What we're trying to do is put the fire out in the moment, but the fire is not going to change its conditions and react to us. In the military context, in the MMA context, in the business context, we are making decisions based upon a thinking, acting person. In the fire department context, we are making our decisions, our actions based upon a changing environment. So in the fire department context, and I address this here because I know I'm speaking to a lot of firefighters in these presentations, we need to recognize that we don't need to sow ambiguity in the same way that benefits the soldier, the fighter, or the business person. And I think recognizing how our own environmental context comes into play will help us understand where Boyd is coming from. And it allows us to read his work in a clear, concise manner and apply it to our own individual context. With that in mind, I want to talk about what I think are the most important concepts in patterns of conflict, in how we apply patterns of conflict and its lessons to any domain, to any environment. And it's what we will come to know as the 4 German words. If we look at slide 72 in the original slide deck, and we look at the operating philosophy here, this is coming back to the German Blitzkrieg, and Boyd trying to understand why the Blitzkrieg in its application was so incredibly effective. What he identifies is 4 key points. First off, key point, that at each level, from the simple to the complex, from the platoon leader to the theater commander, each of them has their own OODA loop. The point he drives at here is that at any given level, from the platoon leader to the theater commander, we must understand what is happening in our environment. We must have Fingerspitzgefühl, the fingertip feel of the environment, the ability to implicitly know what is happening on the ground in our environment. One of the things that makes the German Blitzkrieg so effective is commanders at the platoon level all the way up through the division level being on the front line, capable of reacting to what is actually occurring in the moment and adjusting their plan. Obviously, the most well-known example of this is Erwin Rommel leading his Panzer Division to the English Channel in France in 1940. This is the seminal experience, the seminal example, I should say, of Fingerspitzengefühl in action. This brings us to our second point, which is that this individual level of understanding, this individual Fingerspitzengefühl can only be exploited on the battlefield and maintain coherency of the larger effort if we have Einheit. Einheit in German roughly means unity, and another way of looking at it would be a common understanding, an implicit language system, right? So Einheit in the German Command and General Staff was developed throughout the 1930s because all of the officers who found themselves in command positions at the battalion and above level were all graduates of the Command and General Staff system. They all knew one another. They had an inherent trust of one another. They knew what to expect from one another. They had Einheit. They had unity. And as a result, a level of implicit coordination and command established that was able to flow naturally. Einheit can only be developed over time. This is why the constant rearranging of teams can be very destructive in many environments, because even if you have that fingertip control of your current operating conditions, if the team does not have the Einheit, the unity, to understand implicitly what one another will do, there is a breakdown in the ability to exploit that fingertip feel. As we take this knowledge now, this fingertip feel of the environment and this unity of command, to be able to effectively use it on a larger and larger scale, we need to use a concept known as mission tactics or mission concepts. Auftragtaktik is the German phrase, the German word for this. And Auftragtaktik is that notion that we have a broad understanding of the mission and what we seek to accomplish. We do not have specific taskings. In the combat position, I write about implicit command and control versus explicit command and control. And ultimately, it's coming back to this notion of Auftragtaktik, which, if you are a fan of Jocko Willink, would be the decentralized command notion of guiding folks in an operating environment, right? We push decision-making down to the lowest possible level where we have that fingertip feel for the environment. We have a sense of unity and commonality of purpose. We have a mission tactics concept, a commander's intent, not an explicit set of directions to follow. And all of those serve our Schwerpunkt. Our Schwerpunkt is our primary focus. It is the main effort of our given operation, our given set of tactics. What we are trying to achieve is the Schwerpunkt. That is where our focus is. These four German words, and coming to understand them, is going to play a deep role in understanding Boyd. I've talked about now several times how beginning to read and study Boyd led me into my exploration of the German idealist philosophical tradition, and ultimately has led me to studying German in a lot of ways. The language, I don't speak it, I can read it a very little bit, I struggle with it, but it's something that I come back to time and time again, because ultimately there are things that are able to be expressed in the German language that we can't express in English. in a fluid sort of way. German has these nouns that are just very conceptually important. They they discuss an essence that the English language seems not to have, in my observation, my opinion. And while I'm certainly not saying that everybody needs to go out and study German and try and read Kant or Hegel in the original. I think there is something in trying to think about these terms, think about these ideas through these original German words. We're going to take a little detour here for a moment into the world of linguistics. Linguistics is ultimately can be thought of as the philosophy of language and the role that language plays in not only communication, but in understanding. There's a concept in linguistics here that I want to address for a moment, and I think it's really useful for us. And it's what's known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is the notion that we can only perceive and comprehend information within the structure of the language we speak. That our very ability to understand the world around us is rooted in the conceptual frameworks that our language possesses. I think this is a really important and useful thing to visit and spend a moment on, because ultimately, if we talk about perception and comprehension, this is two elements of the classic situational awareness triad. Situational awareness is the intersection of perception, comprehension, and prediction. Within this intersection is where situational awareness is. If our language is devoid of conceptual concepts, our situational awareness is compromised. The philosopher Miranda Fricker would say that we are suffering from a hermeneutical problem. I didn't look that one up, so I may be spelling that one wrong. But hermeneutics is discussing our ability to understand, our ability to comprehend what is happening to us because we have language. This is where I come back to the importance of studying the 4 German words. So if we spend time on Boyd's concepts and the 4 German words with this notion that our language shapes our understanding, by getting outside of the comfort zone of the language that we use, we challenge ourselves to look at these concepts in a new way, by forcing myself to try and understand what these words really mean, not in a translation sense, but in an intuitive, implicit way. I offer myself the opportunity to understand these concepts in an entirely different light, because I offer myself a new language to do it with. And as we go through Boyd, that to me is a seminal point. Boyd spent time deconstructing these ideas and looking at them through the lens in which they were created. If we do the same, we stand to build upon his work and use it more efficiently, more effectively to guide us, not only in understanding how we think, but also in creating new ways of thinking. So ultimately, what Boyd is driving at in Patterns of Conflict is this message: that he who is willing and able to take the initiative and exploit variety, rapidity, and harmony as basis to create as well as adapt to the more indistinct, more irregular, quicker changes of rhythm and pattern, yet shape focus and direction of effort, survives and dominates. This is slide 147 in Boyd's original slide deck. We can find it as well in Osinga's text. Surviving on our own terms. We'll come back to this again and again, because regardless of our operating environment, that capacity to survive on our own terms is what Boyd is driving at. He is driving at that expression of agency within our operating environment. That requires us to use initiative, to recognize variety, the changes in tempo and rhythm within the environment, and respond appropriately. But not just to respond, but to shape our environment, to shape our focus, our direction of effort, to shape our Schwerpunkt. All of this is critical in understanding Boyd. As always, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time with me thinking about these ideas. I find Boyd's work to be incredibly powerful. It is the central theme, really, in so much of what I have studied, learned, and applied in my own life, from fighting fire to parenting to business to everything else. Boyd's thinking has shaped so much of my own and sent me on a quest to understand human thinking, human decision making, in ways I never expected, in ways I never anticipated when I first read Paul Howe's Leadership and Training for the Fight and began thinking about these ideas and how they could improve my fireground performance. I really think that this is incredibly useful, incredibly important information. So thank you to all the Patreons for your support in helping create these videos. This wouldn't be happening without your support, without a doubt. Please, if you are appreciating the work that is coming out of this project, encourage other folks to become patrons as well. It helps build this project out and grow what we're trying to do here. Also, please comment in the description. Begin a discussion of these ideas, not just with me, but with one another. Become a network to help one another understand these concepts and use them. As always, thank you for your time. We'll see you soon. Cheers.